All right, so welcome into today. We are going to dive into a Solana update. Lots of things happening within the ecosystem, but more importantly, right now in the middle of this market turmoil that we're dealing with. So welcome back in. My name is Paul Barron. This is TechPath. Of course, you've jumped in here maybe for the first time, and you guys, of course, are looking for technology, knowledge, education, information, and hopefully some insights that are going to help you guys move forward. We'll do these market movers from time to time that really kind of compile together both our analysis, but also some of our detail and research around projects, especially in the blockchain space. Remember though, this is not investment advice. It's basically getting you guys going on your investment journey and moving on to the next layer of how you guys are kicking it with cryptocurrency. So today, let's jump into Solana. Before we get going, let's just take a quick look. Of course, as of recording today, Bitcoin, of course, has been very volatile, and we've seen it and also had predicted it kind of moving up and down a bit here over a little bit of the time that we have basically been reporting on this at 2.4 trillion in the current market cap. 24-hour volume still very high, which is typical of when we start to see movement like this, 170 billion. And then, of course, Bitcoin at 44.9% market dominance and ETH holding it at 19.1, about to crack in to 20%. So this will be interesting if ETH can actually move into that space. If you look at the pricing right now, Bitcoin, first time we've seen it under 60,000 in a few weeks. And of course, it is holding in right now at 58.9 and Ethereum at 39. This might be some opportunities, and we've talked about this on the show before, some opportunities for buying that dip, getting in these kind of scenarios, because there were so many long contracts that were in position. It was just too juicy for the whales to refuse it. And I think a lot of people got liquidated and moved out of those longs. So long positions sometimes, and of course, especially in the leverage positions, are probably the most dangerous, especially when the market gets to be a little bit overheated, which is where Bitcoin had moved as it had accelerated up to its all-time high at 67 and then started to adjust in what we've seen this week and late last. Let's jump into my first story here on this research is Solana-based yield aggregator Tulip raises 5 million. Of course, this is the DeFi app formerly known as SolFarm. As you guys know, them, over 800 million in total value is currently locked in Tulip now. The 7-month-old protocol, which is at press time, held over 800 million in crypto assets, said Jump Capital and Alameda Research led the strategic investment on this. These are both very renowned companies that are backing what SolFarm or Tulip now is doing. So lots of potential activity here in the ecosystem for Solana as we near basically their developer conference. So I think we're going to see a lot happening in the ecosystem around what's happening within Solana itself. The CEO Sanks said in a phone interview, Tulip intends to double its 5-person team. This is still a very small team. A shortage of Solana-focused engineers could complicate that goal, he said, underscoring the heated competition for DeFi developer talent. Now, that was a very big statement to me to go out and actually make that kind of statement around what's happening in Solana, in the fact that there are a shortage of developers in the Solana ecosystem. That concerns me a little bit in terms of timeline and also what we'll see coming out from some of these many of these projects as we continue to move forward. There's going to be a very interesting, I think, collision point, especially because remember, we're in phase 1, maybe part 2 of this bull run. And of course, altcoin season is literally just behind it. You've got so much activity potentially just reeling up like a tight wound spring for Solana and the ecosystem around it. This could present a problem later in the game. So let's just kind of be aware of that as you're getting out there and doing your investment. I know that's the things that we're looking at as well. Tulip is allowing users to chase double-digit yield on their token deposits and facilitate crypto lending as well as leveraging yield farming. This is, of course, all on Solana. Sanks, the CEO, said over 150,000 unique wallets have interacted with those tools and 10,000 wallets maintain activity. This is interesting to me. 10,000 wallets is barely not even 10% of what that number is in terms of their activity. Now, granted, it's still a very young project and it's very early, But at the same time, this has got, I know this gets into the MVP kind of thing with where many of these VCs put money into companies in some cases that they never get an MVP or a minimum viable product out to market. That can happen, but in the blockchain space, I feel like we've seen much more development architecture in place before things like this happen, where you get, very slow uptake, because typically fast uptake in most traditional tech companies is the sign of something very big. So that does concern me just a little bit, in the sense that what we've seen around the ecosystem overall growing so fast within the Solana basis. So he also said the protocol remains self-sufficient by capturing about 1.2% of Tulip's 9-figure total value locked, which is the US dollar value of the cryptocurrency committed to DeFi protocols that are also built on Layer 1 blockchain. Funding will help them invest more in Tulip Tokenomics, which I think, this is a good statement from a upstart CEO, is to really understand the idea. And I think all CEOs or all companies, I shouldn't say CEOs, companies that are developing this ecosystem understand the tokenomics and how important that is, especially to the more educated investors, people that go in, look at the tokenomics, really understand the team behind it, look at the mission, all those kind of things that really matter in projects like this, is definitely one that we should be watching. Let's jump over quickly to this next story, which is the expanding ecosystem and 1.86 billion in futures open interest that backs Solana's 250 price target. This is a big statement in here. Derivatives data shows institutional demand remains very strong for Sol, and on-chain data points to a rally around 250. And we're going to show some charts here in a minute. Before we get into that, and also before we get into the rest of this story, make sure and join. I want you guys to jump into something like Solana, something that's fast rising and very stable, and that is the Diamond Circle. Diamond Circle is free for you to join. We're going to be doing all kinds of things like airdrops, all sorts of token analysis, special member projects, as well as deals, things like that, all free to you to join. Just jump over to the link in the description below. You'll be able to get to it. All we need is your email address and be able to contact you if you win some money in some of our drops that we do very often. We've already given away 2 big Diamond Circle rounds, so a big deal there. Join it. You're going to love it. Let's jump back to the story. This is kind of interesting here because there are some pretty intriguing factors around this. Institutional investor interest is likely a key factor when you look at what Sol has been able to do over the course of this summer, really since August. The 4th largest Bitwise 10 crypto fund, our index fund component overall, which has 1.3 billion over-the-counter tradable and market instrument. This is pretty crazy at 1.3 billion. Solana's most prominent decentralized finance projects are decentralized exchanges, which are the DEXs that we're talking about. If you guys have not checked out some of these, I mean, Mango Markets would be a good example, I think, of one that you have to look at. Sabre is an automated market mover or market maker. I always want to call them market movers. That's the name of this show. But market maker protocol that trades between stable pairs and synthetic assets, provides yields and platform liquidity providers. Then you've got Radium, which also offers a DEX for yield farming and liquidity pools. So good stuff in the sense that when you look at the overall capability of where Sol could go and institutional positions behind this in a long open contract, I think we are going to see fireworks coming at Solana very soon. And even though we haven't already seen fireworks coming at Solana, but I think this is a very interesting. This chart right here really kind of shows a little bit into this. And this, of course, is the futures that are open interest reached a record high. And the positive news flow has reflected, obviously, Solana's derivative markets as depicted by the aggregate futures open in the interest data below. You can kind of see here Binance, BitMEX, Bybit, FTX. Look at FTX, man. They are just, that's just insane. The volume that FTX is pushing on Solana. So that's, I think that in itself is really going to start positioning, because if you look at the indicator, reached a record high 1.86 billion on October 25th, just this week, which is a 123% increase in 30 days. Put this in perspective. I think this is a good way to do it, and that is both Cardano and Polkadot's currently holding at 900 million in futures open interest. So you've got Solana at double that amount at 1.86 billion, which is just absolutely phenomenal. So traders should acknowledge that the event is not necessarily positive, as futures contracts require both buyer long and seller short. Nevertheless, this increasing interest allows for even more substantial players to participate. This gets back into the institutional side of things. When you have something that has that kind of locked value at 1.3 or 13.52 billion, and you've got a little bit of this movement happening within Solana, it starts to really change kind of the perspective of how these investors are looking at Solana, because it has so much headwind, number one, and room to move for liquidity purposes. So that makes it a very viable target for big investment, meaning big numbers going into this. So be on the lookout for that. And just to give you an example of what I mean by that is this chart right here. Let's take a quick look. And as you guys know, we've charted Solana several times. The last update we did. In fact, we're doing this episode because of you guys. You asked for us to do a Solana update. Well, guess what? You're getting one. And that is, and it's a good time. It's a good time for it because it does really dive into where and what we're seeing. But if you look at the data, I want to just show you right here the movement that we've been tracking over the past few weeks. So back here in early October, we saw this move after that sentiment downslide, 72 to a 70. And we went sideways, which we anticipated. All this purple squigglies that you guys see is our analysis overlayer indice of our sentiment and amplification data that we pull on our own proprietary system. And it gives us basically a match to what's happening in the market from a price perspective. Right now, sentiment, if you look back here in this bubble at October 17th, 81.20, 79.81 on the AMP, very close. And then we saw this right here, which is very interesting to me while we're looking at the slide. Solana now at 191 trading live right here, but up the slide from 219, which it had hit back on October 25th, a nice little bump right before this fall right here. And we've scored sentiment in this little run up right here. And when you look at this area of information, it gets very intriguing to me because you've got sentiment now being flipped by AMP. And amplification in a low like this, where we're seeing potential lows at Solana right here on that very low wick at 180. But right here, I think is our resistance point, which is that 187-ish, 190-ish area. This is going to be a big factor because amplification is now flipped. And this usually indicates, and when we show you kind of the forecasted, because remember, this has all been drawn out. We're doing the same thing here with a potential upswing right here heavily after maybe a little bit continued sideways action for the next day or two before we see Solana really break out. So it does come and fall in line with what we're seeing both in the news, the futures contracts, what we're seeing in institutional supplanting and maybe supporting, and then of course the ecosystem movement that we're also seeing. So it's kind of like a perfect storm for Solana. Can it make it to $300? I think that's the big question. Does $300 make it? And I don't know. I think the key here is going to be a factor of whether or not it can pull off a major upswing with Bitcoin, because I feel like Bitcoin is going to be one of those things that we need to see more activity, which the volatility may do what we had anticipated is fall into that 54 to 55 range, and then be able to still jump back in. So big stuff coming for sure. I want to, of course, get your feedback and also your input on projects that you want us to really start drilling down on. I know the NFT gaming projects are a big one, and we continue to do a lot of research internally. Moving on that, I'm burning the midnight oil on NFT gaming to try to give you guys more and more on that, and hopefully more analysis, because these are much earlier projects that have a lot less data to be able to look at. So it's a very interesting situation right now. So make sure, join the Diamond Circle. Stay tuned right here for more great content from, of course, PBN and TechPath. Okay, by the way, if you want to hit me up on Twitter, it's @PaulBaron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.